Hello, welcome to the next in the series of the Mamemeister readout, whatever you want to call it, where I read out an article I wrote for WayofThe Rodent, which was an online magazine. This one doesn't actually have a name. I'm going to call it Open Air Markets and Piracy. So anyway guys, again, apologies for not looking at the camera because I need to look at the monitor to read what I'm going to read out. Okay, hope you enjoy guys. The 64 was showing her age. She just couldn't cut it with the demanding, near-impossible ports of modern arcade cabs she was being asked to do. Any glance at the shiteness of Outrun or Afterburner told her story. The 8-bit market was dead. The 16-bit market was breaking, and I had my heart set on an Atari ST, spurned on all the more with the fact that my mate Ian had recently gotten hold of a lovely grey Atari ST 540 FM. The difficult bit was going to be sourcing the cash, made all the more difficult given it was around £300 and I had an annual salary of just over £2,000. As had become a common occurrence with many upgrades I've made, these have been partially funded with the sale of old hardware. The 64 was reluctantly sold to a mate of a mate. He bought it and made weekly payments were agreed upon. Unfortunately, the bloke decided to default in payments and a visit was required by my old man and myself to retrieve the goods. The 64 was eventually sold on, made all the more desirable with the 400 odd pirate games bundled with it. At last I was able to finally buy into this new exciting market and headed up to Ray's computer shop to lay down my deposit and agree on the 24 monthly payments. I came away with the standalone machine and a copy of TNT, a shameless Commando clone, albeit with exotic graphics. For months, Ian and I made do with that and his two games, Prohibition and Arkanoid. Buying the hardware was merely the start. Trying to scrape enough to buy any bit of software was hard, especially since the market forces had decided that £30-40 was going to be the norm. Ian and I decided to buy one between us a month, taking it in turns to own the respective game. It soon became quite apparent that boring games was shit, but things took a turn when Grant Henderson acquired his ST. If Grant, Hendo as he was called, fell in the River Clyde, he would surface with a salmon in his mouth. Such was his luck and good fortune he seems to attract. He could be construed by many as being a dodgy bloke. Perhaps he was, but he was a nice guy, and with it our 20-year friendship has continued. Grant, never one to miss an opportunity, befriended Craig. Craig, a youngster no older than 10 years. Craig was precocious, arrogant, big-headed, loved Garfield and was downright irritating and obnoxious. He also knew a hacking group and hence had pretty much every game out for the Atari ST. Grant hit on this opportunity and through allowing Craig to hang out with us 20-somethings, we could cream games at will, leaving Craig's parents' house of an evening with a bundle of 100 plus discs to copy with the promise of returning them first thing in the morning. Things were good. We could lay our hands on any game months before release. We were basking in our 16-bit glory and could never imagine wishing to change. But change they did in early 1989. The Amiga had dropped in price and was the hardware to own. Ian, Hendo and I saw this and wanted one at any cost. Back then, independent, smoke-filled computer shops ran the show and it showed they pretty much had a free rein with prices. You either paid them or went without. Scouring Yellow Pages, Ian spotted a shop in about the only arcade resort in Scotland, Portobello. The place was and still is a rundown seaside resort, although it enjoyed a boomtown in the summer months in the 50s to mid-60s. It had a few derelict arcades, boasting some rundown machines with generally fuck controls and buttons. Ian drove through and we eagerly carried our boxed STs in to be handed in along with a favourable wad of sterling, and in return we left with a spanking new Amiga 500, the modulator being an extra outlay. Luckily Craig had jumped ship to Commodore, which promised a stream of software. Within days I had around 100 discs, with pretty much every Amiga game out there. Things were to change. As Craig matured, he seemed to pick up on the fact he was for all intents and purposes being used. The stakes were raised. To raid his awesome array of 100 disc boxes entailed you taking him for a game of snooker or pool and allowing him to win a few frames. He became more demanding and unwilling to lend us games to the point the software dried up. Faced with a stark realisation that our milk cow had gone, we faced the grim prospect of buying games. For months we made do with our 300 odd games until a phone call changed everything. Hendo had heard there were people at an open air market near Edinburgh selling games at £3 a disc. Sunday couldn't come quick enough, and with Ian playing the he couldn't afford anything card, Grant and I headed in to Ingliston Market, situated in Edinburgh. Ingliston Market is an institution in Scotland. In its heyday, it boasted the accolade of being the largest outdoor market in Europe. Opening in the early 70s, it was a revelation in central Scotland. Here was a place your mum could pick up a school jacket, 2 pairs of trousers and a pair of school shoes for £5. It was a veritable Aladdin's cave of stuff. You wanted it, someone sold it. Donut and hamburger stalls sat adjacent to gym equipment and pet food stalls. We entered the car park and were directed by orange-vested fat blokes to our bit in the mud. Climbing out the car, the cold air and rain stung our face. It always rained at Ingliston, even in the midsummer it rained. It was almost as if this was God's way of paying us back for buying counterfeit goods. We didn't care. We would get in and get out as quick as possible. Shuffling through the mud, we scanned the rows and rows of stalls with only some sketchy direction that the guy had a beard and is parked next to a bloke selling Bros mirrors. Every other stall had Jason Donovan and Bros mirrors. No, hang on, beard. Yep, he's got a beard. The thing that immediately struck us was the complete lack of merchandise on show, bar a few A4 sheets of paper. He gave us a cutting, don't fuck with me stare, but Hendo broke retention with his usual charming Jack the Lad banter. We asked the price and sure enough, £3 a floppy disk. £3 for a full game. I'd just come. Little time was spent hanging around once we'd each bought 5 games. We hurriedly made our way back to the car, going via Grant's to copy the games for each other. Sundays were now Ingliston Day, usually heading out as early as possible to get the latest wares. Things progressed with his stall, now offering a few box joysticks for sale and a couple of 3-year-old originals scattered on the black cloth wooden counter. The A4 lists were gone and had been superseded by folders with lists, the complete A to Z and a page one with the latest offerings. We'd become regulars and would stop and blether, always hoping for a freebie, which never happened. Bearded Brian had done time in prison, so he told us. Whether this was true or merely to buy our silence, I don't know, but the slashes down his face kind of affirmed that he had indeed been in Her Majesty's pleasure. In the coming weeks, the staff payroll grew. Bearded Brian was now helped out by one of his sons, Young Brian. Young Brian was going to become a quantity surveyor and would always grin when I questioned his respectable choice of career being funded by this. Bearded Brian obviously had aspirations to make the business a family concern, as within 6 months, 2 sons and 3 of his daughters were now serving. The oldest girl was a fucking babe, long dark hair with sallow skin and a smell to melt the heart. There were now 2 reasons to come here. Only a discerning fool would have thought there was any chance with her. The cutting figure of her ex-con dad hovering in the background ensured you thought with your head first. Bearded Brian had very little hassle in that respect, given 99% of his clientele were on average 20 stone, bespectacled geeks whose interest was held with the promise that Eye of the Beholder 2 would be out next week. The operation moved on from copied while you wait to pre-copies being handed out to ease the queues. Within 6 months, the demand had become huge. From the early days of just Grant, myself and a couple of others, now you had to wait your turn, along with the dribbly-nosed kids and the arrogant 40-somethings who always bought about 20 games. Short of having a huge neon sign proclaiming copied games sold here above the stall, the massive queues were starting to look a touch conspicuous. Beard Brian wasn't there one week, just a bunch of desperate figures shambling aimlessly around, somehow thinking that Bearded Brian was going to come out of thin air. The penny soon dropped that they'd be returning home to their sad empty lives. We returned the week after, and sure enough, Bearded Brian was back. He'd been busted the previous week, early doors, and was incensed that a policeman had assaulted his daughter. For fear of retribution, I played the sympathetic listener and agreed that the pigs were indeed scum. The power of the law had wielded its force so hard on this guy that he was back 7 days later with his 10,000 odd discs again. In an effort to prevent this happening again, Bearded Brian introduced a polythene curtain which you had to pull back, which allowed you to stand shelter from the elements and unseen at the back of a stall. I hated that, standing with all those people I had nothing in common with. They were always ugly, always looked poor, and I loathed them. I loathed them for lowering themselves to this level, hiding behind a polythene sheet to buy stolen games. We were different, we just were. The winds of change brought a marriage which made getting through on a Sunday more difficult. Many a Sunday I would inform Julie I had to pop through to see my dad and would be back in half an hour. Accelerator to the floor, I'd speed through without Grant. Time constraints wouldn't allow. Hand over the cash and then get back within an hour. My addiction was kept hidden. Julie never questioned how my disc box was bursting at the seams. She didn't care. Stalls popped up all over the place. Everyone and their aunties ran them, and I hated them all. I'd buy their games, but I hated them. Even fucking elderly women sold games. The floppies became CDs, and within 8 years, the last legitimate flower and music stall had shut up shop, leaving around 100 piracy stalls. Beardy Brian was still there, and so was Brian. So much for his fucking QS career. I've now got broadband, and that allows me to never have to step my foot there again. Last I heard, Inglestown was closed down in February 2006. Okay guys, that's it. Hope you enjoyed it. Again, leave your comments if you enjoy it, and if you like the channel, please subscribe. Thank you, bye.